My name is Corin Parsons. I am a PhD candidate in geography and one of the co-organizers of this symposium. I am a white trans man with short brown hair, glasses, and a kind of oatmeal colored sweater. And today my co-organizers and I are coming to you from the traditional unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. This land acknowledgement is only a very small piece of what needs to be done as part of anti-colonial work, as part of our ongoing commitment to decolonization. We cannot do disability-related work without also doing anti-colonial work because colonization relies on ableism, and ableism grows out of colonial relations. We're here talking about the academy, about what we want spaces of teaching, learning, and knowledge production to look like. So we need to be very clear about what the role of the contemporary university has been in shaping, justifying, and perpetuating oppression. Institutions of higher education, including UBC, have not only been complicit in these processes, but in fact central to devising and legitimating the oppression of Indigenous people and disabled people, as well as the disabling of Indigenous people. Furthermore, the Contemporary Academy continues to be a space in which disabled people and Indigenous people are more often treated as objects of inquiry than as colleagues and contributors, and that needs to change. So if you showed up to this session in the spirit of disability justice, please also be here in the spirit of anti-colonial work and decolonial work. If you're participating from further away, please reflect on your relationship to the specific Indigenous communities on whose land you live, work, and learn, or take a moment to think about the additional forms that ongoing colonial relations take wherever you are and what you can do to dismantle them. Next, during our time together today, we want to invite you to do whatever lets you attend to your needs and participate to whatever extent feels doable to you. This may include stimming, eating and drinking, lying down, stretching, moving around the room, doodling, etc. We've tried to build accessibility into the symposium as best we know how, but access is a process. So if there are ways that we can make this or future sessions work better for you, please let us know in the chat or follow-up survey. And lastly, a quick note on terminology. We as the symposium organizers are using identity first language rather than person first language. So instead of saying person with a disability, we're saying disabled person in order to assert the importance of disability as a social, cultural, and political identity. However, we also understand that not every disabled person uses identity first language, and the right way to refer to an individual is the way that they wish to be referred to. So with that, I'll pass things over to Ayaka.
Thank you very much, Corin. Hello, my name is Ayaka Yoshimizu. Today I'm speaking from the unceded lands of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. I was born and raised in Japan and came to the Coast Salish territory in 2004 as an educational migrant and an uninvited guest. I have medium short black straight hair, and today I'm wearing a no-sleeve wide neck silver gray sweater on top of a black long sleeve shirt. I am an assistant professor of teaching in the Department of Asian Studies. I am one of the organizers of this symposium, along with other members of the organizing committee, including Shota Iwasaki, Charlene Oba, Corin Parsons, and Donna Solomon. I am a non-disabled person, and I am in the process of unlearning ableism and imagining what an accessible society might look like through the work I have been doing with the members of this committee. And Corin, Shota, and more recently Donna have been my teachers in my learning and unlearning journey. I'm grateful to our speakers today for sharing their knowledge and experience, and I am excited to learn from them. But before we move on to our main program, let me provide you with some context of this event. This event builds on our multi-year project that has focused on disabilities, ableism, and accessibility for disabled instructors at UBC, including faculty, sessionals, and graduate student TAs. So in the past, we administered a UBC-wide survey, conducted 101 consultations, and facilitated 2 workshops centering participation of disabled instructors. The results from the project revealed a lack of professional development and instructional supports for disabled instructors, and inadequate institutional investment in creating space for community building, discussion, and mutual support. And that motivated us to organize this symposium. And we are hoping that this will give us a momentum for the creation of Center for Disability Studies at UBC. So let us share the links for our past project outcomes in the chat. The links are also available on the event page. So Aiden, it'd be great if you could share the links in the chat. One thing we have been practicing to make an event like this more accessible is to take a multi-temporal and multimodal approach to organizing and carrying out our events. By multi-temporal, we mean that not all the communication takes place within the time frame of this event in an immediate and spontaneous way. This is why part of the material was sent out beforehand, I believe last Friday. So you had additional time to review them and send us questions if you like. During the symposium, you're welcome to post your questions and comments in the chat, but you're also welcome to send them to us later if you want to revisit the materials or have additional time to reflect. We are going to post a link for the presentation materials for those of you who registered for the event on or after last Friday and did not receive the email. We also post my email address in the chat so you can send us questions later. And finally, we also take a multimodal approach to facilitating communication between us. After the keynote presentation, we will invite you to share your thoughts, comments, and questions. You're welcome to speak by unmuting your mic or write your comments in the chat. After our three panelists present in the afternoon, we will have time for an interactive activity. We will be using an online platform called Padlet, so you have additional channel to share your comments. And we will explain how this works when the time comes. So now Shota will present our keynote speaker, Dr. Michelle Owen.
Hello, everyone. My name is Shota Iwasaki. I have a speech disability, so let me use a computer-generated voice instead of my physical voice. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
I'm a PhD candidate and teaching assistant in the Asian Studies at UBC, and one of the co-organizers of this symposium. I am an East Asian man with short black hair, wearing glasses and a blue Oxford shirt. My pronoun is he, him. I am sitting in my room at home, with the background blurred. It is an honor and a pleasure for me to introduce today's keynote speaker, Dr. Michelle Owen. Dr. Owen is a professor in women's and gender studies and coordinator of disability studies at the University of Winnipeg. From 2003 to 2004, she was research chair at the Canadian Centre on Disability Studies. Her research interests are disablement, chronic illness, gender, sexuality, violence, and theory. Some of the courses she teaches are Embodied Subjects, Theorizing Disability, and Sexualities, Disabilities and Rights. In addition to the contribution to academic journals and edited books, Dr. Owen's publications include 3 co-edited books: Not a New Problem, Violence in the Lives of Women with Disabilities, published from Fernwood Publishing in 2018. Working Bodies, Chronic Illness in the Canadian Workplace, published from McGill Queen's University Press in 2014. And Dissonant Disabilities, Women with Chronic Illnesses Explore Their Lives, published from Women's Press, Canadian Scholars Press in 2008. The University of Winnipeg offers a unique disability program, jointly with the Disability and Community Support Program, at Red River College. Dr. Owen is leading the disability program as coordinator. Today, Dr. Owen shares with us her experiences as a disability studies scholar and coordinator of the Disability Studies program at the University of Winnipeg. Her keynote is entitled, Imagining and Reimagining Disability Studies in the 21st Century. Please help me to welcome Dr. Michelle Owen.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shoda. I'm so glad that our paths crossed and that we connected, and I'm so happy that this symposium is happening and that I'm here. I'm very honored. So thank you so much for inviting me to speak about disability research, education, and activism. I'm speaking, oh, wait, sorry, I forgot to describe myself. I'm sort of in the dark, which always seems to happen to me on Zoom calls, and I'm actually quite comfortable with it. I like sort of being here, so it's a happy coincidence. I'm a white woman, really sort of pink after a long winter. I have unruly dark curly hair. I'm sitting in my office with some of my disability awards behind me, which I'm very proud of. And I'm wearing my favorite button that says, I'm on crip time. I don't know if you can see it. I'm speaking to you today from ancestral lands located on Treaty 1 territory. Treaty 1 is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples. And it's the homeland of the Métis Nation. I also would like to acknowledge that our water is sourced from Shoal Lake 40 First Nation. This symposium provides an exciting opportunity to imagine and reimagine disability studies in the 21st century. In this keynote, I will reflect on my experiences, as Shota said, as a disability studies scholar and disability studies program coordinator in Canada. Please feel free to interrupt me by making a noise. I probably won't see chats or whatever. So yeah, feel free just to interrupt me if you need to, and otherwise we'll have time for questions afterward. Everyone can hear me okay, and you're getting the captioning and the ASL, all good? Okay. Okay, so allow me to begin by stating my belief that all universities should have disability studies. In fact, in my reimagining, disability studies would infiltrate all levels of education, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Some of the positions I occupy are white, cisgender, queer, and disabled. I'm not impartial, and I have more political agendas than I can reasonably tackle in one lifetime. I strive to be an academic activist or activist academic. Social justice agendas underlie and inspire and guide my scholarly pursuits. When I entered post-secondary education as an undergraduate in the 1980s, disability studies was unimaginable. The students and professors appeared to be predominantly non-disabled, as well as white, male, straight, and middle class. Women's studies, as it was known then, was just being imagined. This is noteworthy because women's studies was the first interdiscipline to combine activism and academics. In these early courses, disability was rarely, if ever, added on to the triad of gender, race, and class. In truth, race and class were not given that much attention by the white professors. This is not to suggest that the feminist women who began women's studies did not have a struggle in the patriarchal post-secondary structure. I'm not entirely sure that my students believe me when I tell them that some of the buildings at the University of Western Ontario, as it was known then, only had washrooms for men. Women were not expected or indeed entirely welcome. From 1984 to 1988, I studied political science, which was dominated by men and male perspectives. I had one professor who was a woman, and I quickly befriended the other few female students. Fortunately, feminists in various departments had begun to offer courses, and I think I took them all, which was relatively easy because there weren't that many. In retrospect, it was an exciting, albeit challenging time to be an undergraduate, to be at UWO. And I had the honor to take classes from two of the four authors of the Chile Climate Report, Constance Backhouse and Alison Wiley. Released in November 1989, the report paints a bleak picture of the history and future of female faculty at UWO Western. Tellingly, all of the women who were interviewed chose to remain anonymous. In the introduction to the Chile Climate Report entitled "A Cold, Lonely Environment for Women," the authors write that, quote, "This report is intended to deal with the issue of gender discrimination, and as such does not attempt to deal with the very serious problems of discrimination against women and men of diverse races, persons with disabilities, Native people, and other disadvantaged groups," unquote. They continue, quote, "We do not mean to suggest that these groups do not receive as much, if not more, discrimination and harassment than white women," unquote. But as they explained, there just weren't enough faculty members from these groups for representation in any meaningful way in the study. So why am I telling you about this report that's over 30 years old? Partly because it's embedded in my academic activist story, and also to give historical context to the development of disability studies. It's also pivotal in terms of the trajectory of social justice activism in academia. More than 3 decades ago, a group of white women challenged a prestigious Canadian university on the basis of gender discrimination. That had a big impact on me and the other female students I knew. I can only imagine what it meant to my female professors. And as dated as the report is, it left an opening for, quote, very serious problems of discrimination, unquote, in universities, including disablement. I went on to do a master's degree at Western in the Center for the Study of Theory and Criticism, and I became a teaching assistant in the fledgling Women's Studies program, which officially began in 1987. Fun fact, in 1973, the University of British Columbia launched the first academically credited women's studies program in Canada. Again, there were very few women students in my program. Two, me and one other student. It was a small program. But I continued to work with as many feminist professors as I could. From there, I went to the Ontario Institute for Studies and Education at the University of Toronto. Finally, in the 1990s, which is in the 1900s, I was surrounded by women students and professors in the Sociology and Equity Studies department. I had the privilege to work with feminist scholars who were interested in gender and sexuality and increasingly race. These scholarly pursuits had become imaginable although disablement as a course of study was still elusive. At the same time, the women professors at OISE, as it's known for short, were getting sick. There were rumors that the building was the cause. However, these women were also working with a lot more students than the men were. There were a lot of feminists like me who were drawn to the Department of Sociology and Equity Studies because of the female faculty. I didn't realize until much later how inequitable this situation was. As a feminist, I've always been interested in bodies and embodiment, but my scholarship was not focused on disability until my own experience of disablement as a professor, or rather, the first experience I acknowledged as such. Upon graduating from OISE UT in 1999, I was offered one-year contracts in 2 sociology departments. One in Reno, Nevada, the other in Winnipeg, Manitoba. While Reno was definitely warmer, it's also in the US, and people, including students, are allowed to carry guns. So I began working as an assistant professor at the University of Winnipeg in 2000. During that time, I interviewed for a tenure track position in the same department, which began in 2001. I was the successful candidate and began preparing for a permanent move from Ontario to Manitoba. Another fun fact, I went to Winnipeg for 1 year, and that was 23 years ago. While in Toronto in the summer of 2001, I suddenly lost vision in my left eye. Not completely, but everything was gray and it was difficult to see. After a number of examinations and a spinal tap, I was told that I had quote unquote probable MS, multiple sclerosis. Probable because I didn't meet the medical definition of MS, which required 2 different episodes in 2 different parts of my body, and fatigue didn't count. I later learned that this threshold differed across Canada. My MRI, magnetic resonance, oh, sorry, I have trouble with that word, imaging, MRI, results indicated that I had numerous lesions on my brain, which have since then started going down my spine. I don't completely understand this process, but inflammation damages the myelin and scar tissue forms as a result of nerve damage. While that time period is a bit of a blur, I distinctly remember lying in a hospital bed with a doctor and residents surrounding me. The doctor was asking me about my symptoms before I had experienced this flare-up. I smiled, maybe even laughed, when he pressed me about fatigue and depression. As a newly single woman who had just completed a doctorate and started an academic position, my whole life seemed to be a whirlwind of fatigue and depression. But I considered and still consider myself fortunate. I obtained 3 university degrees despite coming from a very working class background where not everyone finished high school, let alone went on to post-secondary. I didn't set out to become a professor. I just like learning and reading and discussing ideas. Something I'll tell you, my school adverse child does not understand at all. And I got a tenure track job when I graduated, which was difficult even in the early 2000s. As for my probable MS, the university health benefits for my new permanent position began the same month as my diagnosis. That meant I was able to take sick leave the first term of my new job. I don't know how I would have managed otherwise because I could barely read or use a computer and I slept a lot. Even when I was awake, I felt like I was half asleep. MS fatigue has been likened to trying to move through thick honey. I don't remember a lot from that time except the 9/11 attacks. I only went out for groceries and prescriptions and medical appointments. Sometimes I tried to figure out how I was going to be able to get back to work. I learned that human resources had absolutely no idea about accommodations for episodic disabilities. I felt lonely and isolated, and my mental health wasn't stellar. Still, I had degrees and a career and a salary and benefits. I also had a place to live and food to eat, and I knew that was a lot more than most. I worked hard for what I had, but I was also aware and still am aware that unearned privileges like my white skin played a large role. I eventually regained the sight in my left eye and the intense fatigue subsided. I returned to work with a personal interest in disability that turned into a scholarly one when I was appointed to the Canadian Centre on Disability Studies, CCDS, now known as Eviance, as research chair and research director. During this secondment, I was immersed in disability research in a city known for disability activism. In my new role, I led a variety of projects on topics such as education, employment, housing, leadership, and so forth. Some of these projects were already in progress when I became research chair. Others I helped to initiate. Members of disability organizations and activists and disabled people were included and consulted. Again, I was lucky. My new identity as a disabled person opened a door for me that quickly changed the course of my career. Although I didn't have a background in disability studies, I was a quick learner, and I brought with me knowledge of socio-political oppression, as well as research and writing skills. I'm quite certain that I wouldn't have been offered this position if it hadn't been for my experience with disablement. This is, of course, in keeping with nothing about us without us, a mantra which underpins disability endeavors. I'm thankful for this opportunity because I got to learn about a new and emerging field, and I connected with interesting scholars and activists. What's become interesting to me, though, is why I didn't explore disability and chronic illness sooner. Academically, it wasn't imaginable until I had completed my studies. The School of Disability Studies at Toronto Metropolitan University, formerly Ryerson, launched in 1999, is, quote, the first in Canada to provide a degree, the first in Canada to provide a degree exclusively from a disability studies perspective, unquote. But personally, I've lived with disability my entire life. Many women in my family have severe arthritis and mental health issues. My paternal grandmother was given electric shock therapy. There are stories on my mother's side about arthritic hands being broken to unclench them. I had juvenile arthritis. Now I have osteoarthritis and fibromyalgia. And I've experienced depression for as long as I can remember. Although it really took hold when I was an undergraduate, which is apparently not uncommon. I've only recently started to talk about my depression in public. Why? Internalized ableism, shame, fear, probably all of these and more. Students will tell me in private that they are depressed, and ask me if I think that counts as a disability. I tell them that according to the World Health Organization, WHO, quote, depression is the leading cause of ill health and disability worldwide, unquote. I also ask them if they feel that their depression is disabling. The answer is inevitably yes. I then ensure that they have supports. Globally, about 5% of adults experience depression. Depression is 50% more common among women than men, and each year more than 700,000 people die due to suicide, unquote. In this country, 1 in 4, 25% of Canadians aged 18 and older screened positive for symptoms of depression, anxiety, or post-traumatic stress disorder in early 2021. These numbers were up from 1 in 5 in fall 2020. So obviously the COVID pandemic has had a huge impact on mental health. As a tenured full professor in women and gender studies and coordinator of disability studies at UW, I'm trying to take my own advice and own my mental health struggles, inextricably intertwined with menstruation and menopause, more taboo topics, as disabling. So thanks for bearing with me on this winding journey. My research has primarily been centered on disabled and chronically ill women using a feminist intersectional lens. I've presented papers and written about topics including violence, housing, employment, families, and pedagogy. One of the awards I'm most proud of is the national award I received from the Council of Canadians with Disabilities and Disabled Women Canada in 2009. I was recognized by these important organizations for my valued contribution to the disability rights movement in Canada, especially my scholarship in the area of violence against young girls and women with disabilities. The idea for dissonant disabilities, Women with Chronic Illnesses Explore Their Lives, edited with Dr. Diane Dreger, began to germinate when I was on secondment. The process of constructing this book, a first in Canada, was a thought-provoking and challenging experience. The first problem we encountered was resistance from disabled people who felt that chronic illness wasn't a disability. This sentiment harkens back to an earlier time when activists struggled to define disability as a state of being distinct from being sick. This was a critical move when the charity and biomedical models only allowed for two types of people, healthy or ill, normal or deviant, productive or useless eaters. But the social models of disability, along with the political relational model, which Alison Kafer calls a friendly amendment, have made room for more complexity than these binarisms allowed. People don't have a disability, rather they are disabled by the environment. I'll just add there that that's why I use the language I do, because talking about disabled people fits with the social model of disability. While the removal of the body from the model doesn't quite work for chronic illness, which affects women more than men, and an unknown number of people who don't fit these two restrictive gender categories, it does open up the possibility of being disabled because of a body that cannot be accommodated. What is, after all, the environmental fix for chronic pain, irritable bowel syndrome, anxiety, cancer, diabetes, lupus, Parkinson's? The second issue that arose while we were putting the book together, was that we received far more abstracts than we could accept. I had to look it up. It was over 250 from every country imaginable. An embarrassment of riches, except it didn't feel like that. So many women from all around the world were dealing with so many illnesses. Not only couldn't we publish all the papers, we couldn't help the women. There was obviously a need for this collection, which was affirming, but we felt overwhelmed. Ultimately, in consultation with our publishers, that was Women's Press, Canadian Scholars Press, we decided to focus on the submissions that combined personal experience with the thinking through of that experience. The third difficulty we encountered was that some topics, such as race and indigeneity and motherhood, weren't represented. We reached out to women who could contribute with varying levels of success. Finally, and this was really hard, some women died before the book came out. A woman who was going to be an author, and the artist who did the cover piece. I've since come to realize that this is unfortunately not unusual when working in disability studies. I've also co-edited and written chapters for 2 other books, Working Bodies, Chronic Illness in the Workplace, with the late, great Sharon Dale Stone and Valerie Crooks. And most recently, Not a New Problem, Violence in the Lives of Women with Disabilities, with Diane Hebert Murphy and Janice Ristock. My most recent journal article with Brenda Began, Anna McLeod, Tara Pride, and Caitlin Sibbald is Lower Class Origin Professionals in Canadian Health and Social Service Professions, a Different Level of Understanding, 2022. In 2021, a chapter I wrote with a student, Baden Geek Franz, was published by the University of Toronto Press. Teachable Moments, the intersections of disabilities and sexualities in teaching about sex and sexualities in higher education, came about when they, Baden, challenged me in class about my assumption that all people were inherently sexual. In 2018, Nadine Legier and I had a chapter published in International Perspectives on Teaching with a Disability, Overcoming Obstacles and Enriching Lives. This chapter, How CRIP is to CRIP, Reimagining the Presence of Disabled Professors in the Academy, might be of interest to those of you who are interested in pedagogical and identity issues related to disability studies, and I can post links for these. I will just highlight one more publication, a chapter I've revised and updated through 5 editions. Lack of Support, Canadian Families and Disabilities in Canadian Families Today, New Perspectives. The most recent draft of it was 2022. In terms of research, I'm currently co-investigator on a social science and humanities research grant, part of the Race, Gender, and Diversity Initiative that people might want to apply for. This project, the Right to Housing for Tenants with Disabilities in Canada, 2022 to 25. And I'm finishing up as co-investor on a Canadian Institute for Health Research grant the everyday experiences of minorities in health professions, strange faces in the hallways, 2018 to 2021. So you might notice that I often write and research with others. Scholarly collaboration is much more common in science than it is in art and social science, which just seems to be a matter of tradition. I highly recommend this strategy for a number of reasons. It challenges the outdated ideal of the lone male scholar. It breaks down isolation. It's fruitful to have more than one perspective. And it's really helpful if you are low on spoons because of disablement, oppression, parenthood, etc. I like to think that my publications and research projects are of value to the UW. Certainly, Women in Gender Studies appreciates the work I do. It's crucial that universities have an alternative to the biomedical view of disability that positions disabled people as needing to be cured. At the same time, my research enriches my teaching. American activist and author Simi Lynchen writes that, quote, disability studies introduces a disability reading to a range of subject matter. We prod people to examine how disability as a category was created to serve certain ends and how the category has been institutionalized in social practices and intellectual conventions, unquote. That's from 2005, and I still think it really rings true. The process of imagining disability studies at UW, University of Winnipeg, and then bringing the program to fruition involved community activists and academics. UW has benefited from the addition of disability studies, and as I stated at the beginning of my talk, I believe it's vital for all universities to offer disability studies degrees. In 2010, the interdisciplinary joint disability studies program at UW became a reality, and I was appointed coordinator. The first students were admitted in September of that year. This program has an interesting history, some of which predates me. Prior to the inception of a BA in disability studies at UW, the University of Manitoba had a disability and community support 2-year diploma at Red River College, now Polytech. And that was the first in 1997. And an interdisciplinary MA, Master of Science at the University of Manitoba, which began in 2003. But there was no way to get from the college diploma to the university graduate program. Disability activists, people who worked in disability organizations, most notably Canadian Centre on Disability Studies, students, and professors formed a committee to solve this dilemma. The obvious answer was a bachelor's degree at UW. Employers in relevant fields were surveyed and expressed the opinion that the combination of a college diploma and a BA would make a student highly employable. This worked out really well for UW because it couldn't afford a new BA in disability studies, which meant hiring more faculty. Red River eventually became a degree granting institution, but we agreed that it didn't make sense to offer 2 BAs in disability studies in a city the size of Winnipeg, which is about 855,000 in a province of 1.36 million. The UW-DS program description reads as such. The Interdisciplinary Disability Studies program offers 3-year BA, 4-year BA, and honors BA degrees jointly with the Disability and Community Support Program at Red River College. Students graduate with both a University of Winnipeg degree and a Red River diploma. Disability studies is cross-disability, all disabilities rather than one, intersectional, disability in conjunction with race, gender, class, ethnicity, sexuality, etc., and based in the social model of disability rather than the biomedical model. From this perspective, a lack of ramps is considered disabling, not the fact that someone uses a wheelchair. The focus of the Disability Studies program at the University of Winnipeg is the critical analysis of disability in society. This includes the study of disability as a social, cultural, historical, and political construction. Students are encouraged to examine a wide range of topics, such as human rights, ethics, social movements, theory, family, sexuality, employment, socialization, aging, education, international development, and gender issues. Each year, thus far, 3 of the courses that are required for a major have been offered. Introduction to Disability Studies 1 and 2 at the first year level, Theorizing Disability in second year, and Embodied Subjects or another Disability Studies seminar at the third year level. The Disability Studies research placement is organized as needed for majors. Disabilities, Sexualities, and Rights, a second year course, isn't required, but most DS majors and minors have taken it, and a lot of students from other departments. The word sex is always a big draw, plus it fulfills the humanities requirement. This year, I taught a graduate course, Advanced Disability Theory, for the first time and allowed honors students to register. There are other courses on the books, such as a 4th year honors research paper that are rarely offered. And here's where we get into some of the challenges. The creation of the program took a lot of time and energy. A committee made up of community members and academics did much to convince the administration that a disability studies BA program was needed. So did the employer survey. Once we were given the go-ahead for a new program, there was bureaucracy and paperwork and more bureaucracy and more paperwork. This is not my strong suit, but I forged ahead and I'm proud of the results. In 2011, I was honored to receive a faculty award, the Marsha Hannon Award for Excellence in Creating Community Awareness, in recognition of my role in developing the Disability Studies program at UW. Now I'll share some of the problems that have come up since the inception of the program. To begin with, Disability Studies is a program and not a department. And I don't know how or if this will ever change. There aren't enough students for admin to even consider it. This year there were 15 declared disability studies majors, which is about average, and an unknown number of disability studies minors. I'm still the only full-time faculty member who teaches in disability studies, despite attempts to get another permanent hire. Whatever courses I don't teach go to contract instructors. Disability Studies has always offered some courses online to make the program more accessible. And this actually made pivoting during the pandemic a bit easier. But now the message is that we don't need to be back in the, but now the message is that we do need to be back in the classroom, which is difficult for some students and instructors and impossible for others. As horrendous as the last few years have been, the pandemic taught the non-disabled mainstream a lot about how things can be done differently. We don't actually have to travel to meetings. We can work from home and classes can take place online. I fear that in the rush to get back to business or busyness as usual, and in a province such as Manitoba with a conservative government, these lessons are being lost. I receive a half course release to coordinate the disability studies program, which is much less than a chair of the department, even a small department. It affords me the time to keep on top of administrative demands and student needs, but not much else, like growing the department or the program, for instance. Disability studies doesn't have a budget. I'm technically appointed to WGS, so the departmental budget is supposed to include DS. My feminist colleagues are wonderful and have embraced disability studies, but it's obviously not an ideal financial situation. Given my research interests and position in women and gender studies, many of the courses I teach are cross-listed, which helps me to get enough students so that courses aren't canceled. It also exposes non-DS students to disability studies, which I count as a bonus. Another issue is that the vast majority of students choose the 3-year BA option. Incidentally, no student has yet gone from Red River College Polytech to UW to UM, which was the original vision. I understand that many students want and need to get into paid employment or get promoted in positions they already have. The Disability and Community Support program at Red River, where students study for 2 years, either before or after they come to UW, boasts 100% employment rate. Most students want to combine the 45 credit hours they get for completing the diploma with the 45 credit hours required for the BA as quickly as possible. This fits in with neoliberalism a bit too much for my comfort. Disability studies can be viewed as a quote unquote practical field of study with the primary goal of getting students into the labor market. I'm more concerned with critical thinking skills. I have had a few honors students go on to graduate school, which is honestly much more my style. I'm an old school academic activist who resists the commodification of education. The value of a liberal arts education cannot be measured by its worth under capitalism. Our current economic system forces us to be worker bees, unless we're so rich that we hardly pay taxes. I just wish students could slow down a bit and read and study and think. But I have to be careful what I wish for because I have to offer honors courses myself as unpaid labor in the guise of reading courses. A minor in disability studies became necessary for students who didn't want to do the college program, or for whatever reason, didn't understand that this was a requirement. I'm not sure how it works at other universities, but at UW, I only know who is majoring in disability studies if they declare a major. This isn't an issue for students who register at UW after completing the college diploma. They have to declare disability studies as their major to get the credit hours. But UW students might not declare a major until they are forced to upon completion of their studies. Moreover, minors are only permitted to affirm a secondary field of study just prior to convocation. All of this can result in students who have never spoken to me and might not have taken all the required courses. Despite these challenges, I firmly believe that disability studies is necessary in universities. I can also imagine it infiltrating colleges and high schools and elementary schools. The World Health Organization estimates that 1.3 billion people, or 16% of the world's population, experience a significant disability. In Canada, 6.2 million people, or 22% of the population, aged 15 or older, quote unquote, have a disability. There is so much research to be done and so many courses to be implemented. Ableism, like sexism, racism, heterosexism, classism, etc., needs to be highlighted and deconstructed. This is what disability studies can do. The presence of disability studies at a university signals that disability and disablement are important and worthy of scholarly consideration. Finally, we get to the good part, reimagining disability. I have a lot of thoughts and I'm very interested in what the rest of you think. But here's my imaginative wish list. Institutional support. I imagine money to start new disability studies departments, not programs, where there are none, and funds to strengthen existing disability studies departments and transform disability programs into departments. This money isn't tied to student numbers. Institutional respect. I imagine disability studies widely regarded as a vital area of study, not a fringe interdisciplinary program that is inferior to traditional departments and disciplines. New faculty. I imagine PhDs who have disability studies degrees and get permanent tenure track positions in disability studies. More diversity, people. I imagine disability studies as less white. Faculty and students need to be Black and brown and Indigenous and queer and non-binary and trans and neurodivergent and so forth. More diversity research. I imagine new disability studies research about the global South, race, poverty, sexuality, gender, etc. I leave space for research that can't be imagined yet. Mandatory course requirement. I imagine a disability studies course that all undergraduates have to take, modeled after the mandatory Indigenous course requirement at UW and other universities. In fact, this could be an intersectional social justice course that includes disability studies, women and gender studies, race studies, Black studies, Indigenous studies, fat studies, queer studies, trans studies, etc. Disability studies content in all courses. I imagine professors in every field becoming interested in disability studies and cross-listing courses and incorporating disability studies perspectives into their courses. Accessibility. I imagine disability studies courses and degrees that are accessible to instructors and students who are immunocompromised, who find it difficult to get to and from school, who are tired, who are caring for others, etc. Ableism. I imagine everyone understanding this concept. The meaning of ableism and its ramifications need to be taught beginning in kindergarten. Disabled activists. I imagine disability studies that always includes the work of activists. Activists should be guest speakers and course consultants, and they should always receive generous compensation for their time. Community outreach. I imagine every disability studies department having a paid person who goes outside of the university to raise awareness about disablement and ableism and disability studies. Slow and fast courses. I imagine courses that proceed at different paces. Some students and instructors would do better in courses that move more quickly, while others need to slow down. Shout out to the students who have signaled these needs to me. Disability justice. I imagine disability studies that is shaped by the of disability justice. Intersectionality. Leadership of those most impacted. Anti-capitalist politics. Commitment to cross-movement organizing. Recognizing wholeness. Sustainability. Commitment to cross-disability solidarity. Interdependence. Collective access. Collective liberation. Thank you very much for this opportunity to share my experiences and to reimagine disability studies. Oh, and feel free to contact me at my email address, m.owen@uwinnipeg.ca. Thank you. Thanks for the hands.
Thank you so much, Dr. Owen. This is Corin, and I just want to say that was a fantastic talk. I love what you said about how the presence of disability studies at a university signals that disability and disablement are important and worthy of scholarly consideration. That really resonated, and I really appreciate the vision that you offered for what meaningful support of a robust disability studies program might look like. And I think that sets a great tone for our conversations today. So with that, we'll move into the Q&A, and I can facilitate verbally. Shota will facilitate in the chat. And if you have a question for Dr. Owen, please raise your hand or write it in the chat.
And Corin, will you read out things from the chat, or should I be looking at the chat too?
I'll read that out, no worries.
Okay.
Yeah, Sherilyn.
Hi, I'm Sherilyn Orbach.
Mhm.
I'm one of the co-organizers of the symposium. I'm also the head of Asian studies at UBC. And at UBC, one of the models that we've seen to work well in introducing a new major, minor kind of momentum thing that becomes an academic reality is in starting a center for such and such. Center for Migration Studies, Center for Diaspora Studies, this kind of thing. And then that kind of concentrates the momentum in a way that the administration is able to see it and maybe better imagine or better understand really how much interest and momentum and excitement there is. So have you seen that sort of model? I know you were early in your career working as the research director of a center, but it sounds like at Winnipeg, that's not something that you have done. Have you seen it elsewhere? Do you think this is a good way for us to think? Is I guess what I'm really trying to ask.
It sounds interesting to me. I've certainly heard of centers, not in disability studies, but in other areas. I guess my only concern would be, could that move into a department? And maybe that's not the biggest concern. It just seems to me that centers and programs aren't as solid as departments, and they don't get the same sort of money for appointments.
Yes, thank you. that is, it's like the first step, and then you get a program, and then if you're lucky, you get a department.
Right.
This has worked out for some, but not for everyone. And so I'm wondering, is the center a waste of time when we should be going for something, more solid, more soon? Thank you very much for your answer.
I say go right for a department. If you're in BC, you're in a rich province at a rich university. I'm in a poor province at a poor university. So I say go for the department if you can, and then maybe a program or a center as a fallback.
Thank you.
Quickly, there's a comment in the chat, and then we'll go to Jennifer. So B. Rabar in the chat says, UBC and other universities provide slow and fast intensive courses for language, and Stanford allows students to register for courses with variable units. We can do this. Thank you for your wonderful keynote.
Oh, thank you so much. I taught a 2-week course, which was way too fast for me and most of the students, but one of my students with ADHD said it was the first course that was the right speed for her. And then in this year, I had a student tell me that she would like a term course that spread out over a year so that she could absorb things in a different way. So yes, thank you for those examples.
Jennifer.
Michelle, I want to first say thank you. I have admired your work for many years, and your book, Dissonant Disabilities, is one of the very first times I ever felt seen as a disabled person in academia. And it is one of the reasons that I decided to be public about being disabled and to be a disabled researcher and scholar.
Jennifer, thank you. I'm going to get weepy.
I'm also the president of the Disability Affinity Group at UBC, which is the first group here ever to represent disabled employees and community members at UBC. And one of the dreams that I dare not dream is to have a disability studies department. And I know that one of the biggest barriers that we face isn't just things like institutional buy-in and being able to give voice to the parts of our existence that cannot be accommodated, like chronic pain and fatigue, but also those intersections with precarious employment, where so many of us who have the unaccommodatable body are relegated to precarious contract-based employment, like myself. Mm-hmm. And I wonder what advice you have for us when not only are there so few disabled scholars, researchers, and students, but that many of them are trapped in those precarious positions where we don't have access to power at the university. How do we go about that work of organizing community and achieving that dream of a disability studies program?
Those are all good questions. I am puzzled as to why UBC doesn't have disability studies. Like it must be the only university left in Canada that doesn't have disability studies. The University of Syracuse, which was the first university that offered disability studies in North America, Australia and Britain were a bit ahead. But the University of Syracuse has a really good website where they keep track of disability studies programs in the US and Canada. And the Canadian one is, you can hardly keep up with all the new programs and departments. UBC is just a notable absence there. Yes, okay, so one thing that I've been thinking about is we need a way to bring contract workers in a more meaningful way. And so okay, I'll be more specific. So I think that, like, especially post-COVID pandemic, not post-COVID, that people who cannot physically take the risk of coming to institutions should be allowed to work from home. And like, as of right now, I don't know any examples of like a professor, like not a contract professor, but a tenure track or tenure professor who is allowed to work completely from home. And I think that would be one way, like, I think disability studies should be the leader there, getting contract people real jobs and not forcing them to come to campus. And I think UBC administration should, should know that they're way behind. Oh, I'll say one more thing is that I really object to the increasing reliance that departments and programs and just universities in general have on contract people who are, they're more women than men. But in disability studies, we should do things differently.
I have a quick question if nobody else is going to jump in, which is one barrier that I find myself running into continually when bringing up the importance of disability-related work at the university, is that folks who otherwise, in pretty much every other respect, I'm sorry, there's a cat in the background, are very dedicated to critical scholarship about social difference, etc. And the fact that they refuse to apply that lens to disability sends the message to me that like disability simply doesn't count. And I don't know how to make people see that you count when they're dedicated to not doing that. And it seems to be, I mean, everyone who's here already knows that this matters because we're here, right? And doing this work. But having that conversation with other scholars who really ought to be on board and actually have the tools to be part of that work and to assist in that work and support it, just don't seem to think that it matters. I'm curious how that is something that you've dealt with.
Can we shame people? I don't really get it. And I'm in this great department where, women and gender studies thinks disability is really important. And another kind of related problem is that disability, anything about disability, is rehabilitation or med school or, it's not the sociology of medicine. It's supposed to be something related to medicine. And it's not like there's not, in my own work, there's some overlap, but it's a different critical perspective, right? I just don't understand how people who can do anti-oppression work can't and don't add disability in there. You can, I don't know, send them articles to read. I was also actually just thinking about the question about accommodating, and I think we need to use a lot more imagination about accommodations. And I'm going through this right now with my kid who's autistic, and just having to go and talk to teachers and say, like, well, here, if it, like dance, he was supposed to take this dance class, which was the most, that was even more ridiculous than phys ed. And don't even get me going on phys ed, but, and so I talked to the teacher and he did a compilation of Fortnite dances on the computer. We can accommodate things. For myself, I had to invent my accommodations, and they were things like not teaching first thing in the morning and not teaching late at night, and things to preserve energy. I have a couch in my office, which actually I think students use more than I do, but having a place to relax. We have to think about accommodations outside of ramps. which are important things, but we need lots more accommodations. Masks.
Thank you so much. There are a couple more questions in the chat. Sasha Santos is asking, how do we manage safety with respect to the impacts on employment of disclosing disability versus the safety of masking and staying invisible? I think that's what most disabled folks are doing in the UBC community.
Yeah, it's a real problem, and same here. And I can't believe like this forcing us back into the classroom. What we try to do in women and gender studies is let people work from home that need or want to work from home, but the pressure from the administration not to allow online courses is pretty intense right now. Eye mask, there's some workarounds that we found here to get students to mask. I think we should just have a mask mandate, that's for sure, but we don't anymore. Sorry, what was the other part of that question? I lost part of it.
The second part was, I think that's what most disabled folks are doing in the UBC community. So it was just the question.
Okay, Chrissy. Yeah, and so they're becoming even more invisible, right? This is not what we want.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I have no really good solution for that. And I wish I had a magic wand and could fix all of that. And I hope COVID goes away, but I suspect it's not, and that we're going to have more viruses to deal with. And we need to keep up the pressure around masking.
And then the next question in the chat kind of sums up, I think, all of the questions that you've gotten so far, which is, what strategies do you recommend for helping us get institutional buy-in for a disability studies program?
Well, I think one thing would be to send the administrators a list from the Syracuse website. Like UBC is way behind, and it's a big, rich university. Like, why is it behind? So that's one strategy. And also maybe testimonials from people about why it's needed, from other, you know, they're welcome to my talk if that would help, but maybe just letting them know and reinforcing the idea that disability studies is an important field of study and it's not going away. And it's worldwide, right? And maybe emphasizing how many people are disabled and increasing, like the numbers in Canada between fall 2020 and spring 2021 jumped from 1 in 4 to from 1 in 5 to 1 in 4. So because that's what it's about, right? It's about disabled people, and there's an increasing number of disabled people on campus, people we don't even know about, people who are maybe registered but staying at home, or like me, can usually you know, pass as non-disabled. So that's why I like wearing disability buttons, like I'm on CRIP time. Maybe make buttons. We have a whole bunch of disability and chronic illness buttons here, and we get students to wear them.
Eka, yes.
Hi, thank you so much for your wonderful talk. And I agree with everybody that every university needs a disability studies program. One thing though that you know, that was striking in your talk is that disability as I guess a lens or epistemology should be introduced to courses across units, right? And
yeah,
accessibility should be implemented in our teaching and learning, regardless of the disciplines and, you know, units. I think it's the same as, you know, saying that we need to decolonize our teaching and learning again across departments and units.
Yeah.
And yeah, I've been working on trying to make my teaching accessible to international students, because I came to Canada as an international student and
Right.
speaking English as my additional language. And the more I think about it, efforts to make teaching and learning inclusive for international students is the same process as making it accessible to disabled students and indigenous students and BIPOC students. So I think these efforts should be kind of work together. And yet it seems like this kind of this is not normalized. So this semester, for instance, I had a student coming to me asking for accommodation, and I gave her extension, and she says, this is the only course where instructor gives me an extension, which is quite shocking. So this is more like a comments, but I'm wondering if you have any comments, maybe suggestions, so we can start normalizing, accessibility in our teaching and learning. Again, across beyond, this specific program.
Mm-hmm. So one thing I've done here is when we have accessibility studies here, which, is great. Although when I first started, you didn't require a doctor's note, and now you do. And why? Because the number of students applying went up 300%. So they decided you had to have a doctor's note. It wasn't enough just, to know that you needed accommodations. So accessibility studies will do, roundtables and information things for professors. I latch onto them, and I do my own little talk about how you can make your course accessible, and so fewer students need accommodations, because unbelievably, there's still way too many professors who don't want to accommodate. And so, I thought, that this would be useful for people who are interested in accommodation, and interesting for professors who don't want to accommodate. You could just make your course more accessible for everybody. And, teaching in disability studies, I have probably the highest proportion of disabled students, and I hardly ever have to accommodate anybody, right? So yeah, oh, nice kitty. Give people extensions and slow down the pace if you need to. And, we have some power as professors, especially as we work our way up the food chain. And, one of the things I can do is offer extensions, even past deadlines, right? Like, why not? Plus, I was the student who always needed extensions, so I figure I have to pay back now. But yeah, like maybe some way of letting the academic community know about accommodations and how easy they are.
We have time for one last question before the break.
And again, feel free to email me.
Well, if there aren't any more questions, then, oh, nope, that's a thank you in the chat. If there aren't any more questions, then we'll start break 2 minutes early, and this is a disability thing. Nobody minds more rest. So we'll be taking a break from now until 1 p.m. And when we come back at 1 p.m., we'll have a showcase section talking a little bit about work that's being done at UBC in terms of disability activism and advocacy. And then we'll get into the panel and our discussion after that. So thank you so much, everyone, for participating. Thank you once again, Dr. Owen, for your talk. This was wonderful. We really appreciate it. And we'll see everybody back at 1 p.m. Welcome back. This is Corin. Sounds like we are recording again. So we're going to start the second half of the symposium with a quick showcase of some of the groups engaged in disability-related advocacy at UBC. There's one really great group that's not represented here, unfortunately, and that's the Disabilities United Collective, which is run by some very dedicated and very busy undergraduate students. So this year they've put together a number of events, discussion groups, and helpful resources for incoming students, as well as a mentorship program. So they're doing absolutely fantastic work. Before I hand it over to the folks in our showcase section, I also want to say that it's possible to push for change with the support of allies in your individual units in the absence of formally recognized groups. So for instance, it took a couple of years and a lot of nagging, but with the help of a few other folks in my department, including Molly Holmberg, Gabby Wolf, Lily Demet, Chris Reimer, Dr. Sarah Cannon, and Preeti Naranyan, I was able to create a resource for fostering a culture of accessibility within the department, and I will link to that in the chat. And if it's something that you think would be helpful in your unit, you're more than welcome to copy from this resource and adapt it as it suits your needs. And lastly, there's plenty that you can do in terms of unsanctioned advocacy, even without breaking the rules, like how a group of us in UBC Geography engaged in a bit of guerrilla flyering to promote mask wearing using quotes by famous geographers. So it was educational. So a hat tip to Molly Holmberg for that as well. So with that, I would like to introduce our showcase speakers. So that's Haley Branch, Catherine Benson, and Jennifer. And I see there's a request set to me that Jennifer go first. So if that's all right, we have about 5 minutes each for Jennifer, Haley, and Catherine to speak. So Jennifer, take it away.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Jennifer Gagnon. My pronouns are she, her. I'm wearing a black and white dress, and I have punk red hair and glasses. I am the president and the creator of the UBC Disability Affinity Group. We are one of the first disability justice groups formed at UBC campus, and we are currently the only group that represents disabled employees and alumni at UBC. The Disability Affinity Group is an independent organization focused on disability justice advocacy and creating a community of care. We are comprised of disabled members of the UBC community across both campuses at Vancouver and Okanagan. Our membership includes faculty, staff, postdoctoral fellows, undergraduate students, graduate students, alumni, past employees, consultants, and others who have a connection to the UBC community. As an advocacy group, we have served and advocated for the formation of the UBC Center for Workplace Accessibility. We have advocated and participated in processes related to the UBC hybrid work policy and the workplace accommodation draft policy. Currently, as advocates, the Disability Affinity Group is working hard to create a disability task force and to advocate for disability inclusion on the soon-to-be formed provincially legislated accessibility committee. In addition, we remain strong advocates for creating a disability studies program at UBC, and we encourage anyone else at UBC who is working on these initiatives, please do reach out to us because we would love to share our strengths and work together with you. The Disability Affinity Group often holds meetings about twice a month. These are often drop-in community of care meetings. Simply come and be in community with other disabled folks. Right now, we meet entirely over Zoom to ensure that our members, no matter where they are and what their access needs are, have an opportunity to join and be in community with us. To learn more about the work that we do with the Disability Affinity Group, please feel free to check out our website. You can also sign our petition for a disability task force. And if you'd like to know more or connect with any of us, you are more than welcome to email us at disability.affinity@ubc.ca. disability.affinity@equity.ubc.ca. So thank you so much, everyone. I've got links in my slides, and if you'd like, I'm more than happy to put that information in the chat. And I really look forward to hearing from the other showcase presenters. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jennifer. And thank you. This is Corin again, by the way. Thank you for the work that you've been doing as part of the Disability Affinity Group. I'd like to hand it off to Catherine Benson now.
Hello, hi all. My name is Catherine Benson, and I use she, her pronouns. I'm the co-founder and the current president of the UBC Law Disability Alliance, which is a very recent group out of the law school at UBC that works to support disabled students in law school and then broadly to support disabled students as they progress into the legal profession. So people with disabilities are really underrepresented in the law. There's only about 2% of lawyers who make up lawyers in British Columbia. And so our work is both about supporting people while they go through their law school journey, but also based on the premise that if we have more people with disabilities in the law, we'll have better policy and better laws around issues related to disability. So we do a lot of mentorship within the law school. We do consultation on legislation or various other policies. And we also help students who are undergraduates transition into law school. So we're still a new group, so we're up and coming. It's all in the works. So if anyone is looking to go to law school and wants support as they kind of start that journey, or if they're a law student and they're trying to connect with other disabled students, or if you need to be connected to legal resources, we're sometimes able to connect people to lawyers who are able to help. We can't provide legal advice, but we sometimes are able to make those connections. I'm gonna put my email in the chat. Was I muted for a moment? Okay, am I back to being unmuted? Okay, so I put the email in the chat. It's just our full name, ubc.law.disability.alliance@gmail.com. And so if you've ever like to connect with us, please send us an email, especially if you're an undergraduate student looking to start your journey in law. I know it's really frightening as a person with disability, and it can be really uncertain. And so a lot of what we do is mentorship and connecting people with other lawyers with similar disabilities. So please reach out. And I would love to talk to you, and our team would love to connect. So that's our little blurb.
Thank you so much, Catherine. Thank you for the work that you're doing at UBC and beyond. It sounds like that's fantastic. And lastly, Haley Branch, if you would like to say a couple words, that'd be great.
Yeah, hello. My name is Haley Branch, and I am a white woman with black and blonde kind of streaked hair. And my background right now is just a bunch of grass, because I like to pretend that I am in a sea of plants, because I am an evolutionary biologist that studies plants. So I am a almost done PhD candidate at UBC. I have 1 month left, but I'm also the president and founder of the UBC Disabled Grad Student Association. And this group, I started this as kind of it was right at the beginning of COVID, when I was trying to find people that would share similar experiences as myself, with the fear of losing time for their degree, being scared to die because of COVID. And it was very different experiences than my peers that were like my non-disabled peers. And so as a disabled grad student, I felt like I had a very different COVID experience than a lot of the other students in my department. And so I reached out mostly on Twitter to try to find UBC grad students that had similar life experiences as me. And it blossomed into this group. The general idea is to advocate to the university that we exist, since most of the disability work on campus has predominantly been for undergraduate students with very little resources and accommodations and access for grad students, since much of our requirements can be very different than what an undergraduate student that has a very structured schedule requires. And for instance, things like extended exam times, while we don't have exams, that doesn't necessarily really help us. And so a big part of that has been that type of advocacy, but mostly it's just been to try to find a group of us. We're all scattered and not necessarily we're pretty isolated. I think grad school is isolated in and of itself, and then being disabled at the same time is doubly isolating. So that's kind of what I've been doing at UBC. And I am leaving, and I'm hoping to kind of give this off to someone else. My dream is to become a bigger thing than I could ever have done with it. I just wasn't able to spend as much time as I would have liked. It would be, the goal is to probably have an actual home base for it and meet more frequently, but with my multiple disabilities and illnesses, it just didn't happen the way that maybe I had envisioned. So I'm looking forward to seeing what happens with it in the next 5 years or so. I know that this is supposed to exclusively be about the advocacy work that I do just at UBC, but I also, if that's okay, to talk a bit about some of the other advocacy work. I'm looking at Corin. Good. I know, I'm looking at the time. I also did a large project on equitable assessments of productivity for disabled scholars, and that is something that can be looked up. I can even put that in the chat if people are interested in. I did a survey on Canadian scholars with disabilities and also non-disabled faculty members to try to figure out ways in which we can accessibly or equitably assess productivity and how we can recruit and retain disabled scholars, since academia has failed us on all of that front. And I, something with I have like this deep love for this idea of having a disability studies like faculty on campus. And I think part of it is like, I'm an evolutionary ecologist, and so I don't necessarily study disability in the sense of what perhaps many of you would be studying. But I have this really keen idea of studying it in nature. And I just think of disability studies as the potential to have this really interdisciplinary group of people who aren't necessarily just looking at it in a human lens, but also like disabled plants and that kind of thing. So I will stop myself from continuing to yammer on. Thank you for having me. This has been great.
Thank you so much. I will say that Haley's point about the interdisciplinarity of disability studies is is something that she has some actual experience with. Recently published an article on disability in evolutionary biology that made Richard Dawkins, Elon Musk, and Jordan Peterson all angry enough to tweet about it. So like, congratulations to you. And so, yeah, thank you so much, everyone. You've all done really incredible work, and we all benefit from it. And hopefully this is a setting that can connect folks here and get us to work across these groups a little bit. So with that, we are going to move into the next portion of our day, which is our panel on disability research, education, and activism. So I would like to start off by introducing Dr. Logan Smilges, who is an assistant professor of English language and literature at the University of British Columbia, where they write and teach in queer/trans disability studies, queer/trans disability studies, rhetorical studies, and the history of medicine. They're also the author of Queer Silence on Disability and Rhetorical Absence from the University of Minnesota Press 2022, and Crypt Negativity, which I believe is forthcoming from the University of Minnesota Press in 2023 as well. So with that, I'd like to hand it off to Dr. Smilges.
Hello. This is Logan, Logan. Can people who are listening hear me okay? Wonderful. And unfortunately, I joined a few minutes late to this session, so I want to make sure I understand, are we mostly doing introductions at this point, or Corin, were you hoping for me to move into my presentation?
Oh, if you're all right with doing the presentation, that would be great.
Okay, fabulous.
Thanks.
Yes, I'm going to pull that up then. And I'll begin by just saying that I'm so grateful to be a part of this really exciting event, because as we've been hearing from lots of folks, starting with even the introductions prior to Dr. Owen's speech earlier this morning, there is such a concerted interest in just expanding and deepening the livability of disabled people at UBC. And regardless of the various approaches that we take to this work, it's so affirming to be in community with you all. There are not enough opportunities for us to be doing this work with others. So I'm very grateful to be here. I'm going to share my screen. Sorry. Okay. Can people who are looking at the screen see the slide that I have shared? Perfect. Okay. I'll begin with a very brief introduction. I am new to UBC. This is my first year in Vancouver, in Canada. And I came here from the United States as a professor in critical disability studies. And I was hired by the English department at UBC to do work in disability studies. And so one of the first things that I noticed when I arrived, and that Dr. Owens made very clear in her address this morning, is that there are not many of us doing critical disability studies at UBC, or rather, there's not a lot of institutional support for us to be doing it together. And so one of the things I want to emphasize in my presentation today is both how I understand the field of critical disability studies and how that field, with enough institutional support, might offer us disabled folks, faculty, students, staff, etc., an opportunity to build community, and a kind of community that exists both within and beyond the institution as we know it. So in order to kind of address these various points, I want to break down my talk into 4 main sections. First, I'll offer a little overview of how I arrived to the field of disability studies. Then I'll offer a brief genealogy of the field. So for folks who might work outside or kind of on the margins of critical disability studies, I often find it helpful to overview what the field has been and where it is right now. And then I'll talk about how the scholarship that takes place within the field might be mobilized toward various activist or social justice ends. And then finally, I'll end with some speculations or proposals on how this mobilized scholarship might help us to build disability community. On the slide here, I have a picture of myself when I was 15 years old. And I included this picture because it was at this time that I was first enrolled in gay conversion therapy as a child. And my experience in conversion therapy was traumatizing and horrific in all of the ways you might expect. But it was also my entry point into critical disability studies, because it's in the space of conversion therapy that sexuality, gender, and disability are enmeshed. And it's that kind of enmeshment where multiple categories are either collapsed or entangled that drives my own interest in the field of disability studies today. At the time when I was 15, my life was in many ways just beginning, but I found myself already so tired of the limits that had been sketched out for my life. And these limits had everything to do with my gender being constantly referred to as deficient. I was never man enough, never masculine enough. My sexuality, and that I was, betraying God's plan for me, and also my disabilities. I'm autistic and have a variety of trauma-informed disabilities that were regularly explained to me in such a way that adopted a biomedical model of disability of deficiency, right? So I was just beginning my life, but I was already so tired of the life that I expected to lead. And so many people come to disability studies having only ever understood disability as a pathological object. And I was one of those people because I was the pathological object. And so coming to disability studies, I was someone hungry for new narratives, new ways of understanding myself outside of my own pathology. And I use the language of pathology in this particular instance instead of disability, because I find that it helps us to recognize the breadth of ableism. That ableism does not apply only to things that we might call disability, but also to other ways of occupying a body, including gender, sexuality, race, migratory status, that influence the kind of social significations that each of us bear in our social contexts. And so, what I found in disability studies is that it offered me something of a reversal of the pathological narratives I was used to. It was in the field of disability studies that I learned for the first time that disabled people could be more than objects that were reducible under others' gazes, but instead that we could also be subjects with our own meaningful perspectives, and that disability studies could offer a way of thinking about disability as epistemology. That is a way of thinking, a valuable way of thinking through and about the world. So what I'd like to do now is briefly sketch out some of the different ways that disability studies thinks about disability as a way of thinking about the world. I understand I'm repeating some words here, but I think it'll come into clarity in a moment. We heard quite a bit in Dr. Owen's talk earlier this morning about the social model of disability, which actually originated before the institutionalization of critical disability studies. The simplest way of explaining the social model is that it believes disability is not isolated in an individual body, but is instead produced through the built environment, or rather interactions between a body and its built environment. The most common example being that if buildings did not rely so heavily on stairs as a way for people to gain entrance, then people who use chairs rather than their legs for walking would not be disabled in that environment. Right. So the social model is really thinking about the power of the built environment as a disabling force. Now, I'll be very honest with you. The vast majority of critical disability studies scholars no longer use the social model of disability. It was radical in the 1980s and early 1990s, but it has by and large fallen out of use. In fact, the social model is most often cited by people outside the field of disability studies who want to dismiss the field. And so I think we can be very skeptical of thinking about the social model of disability as somehow representative of critical disability studies. There's been a lot of work that has happened since then that I'm excited to share with you. One of those models or developments is the cultural model of disability. The cultural model suggests that not only is disability produced between an individual and their environment, but also that disability differs at different times, in different places, in different cultures. But it acknowledges that disability doesn't look the same everywhere or for everyone. The political relational model of disability, which I believe Dr. Owens also mentioned briefly earlier this morning, adopts the cultural model and then extends it to say that the different forms of disability we see across the world or across periods of time have political relationships, or their relationships are political. And what I mean by this is that how we might define disability in one place affects how we define disability in another place. They're not mutually exclusive. They're not somehow independent of each other. And this becomes incredibly important when we start to think about relations to power beyond disability. When we start to think about the relationships or the influences of race and class, and position within kind of transnational systems of power that affect what disability means in different places. Now, these three models that I'm outlining here were all developed up through approximately 2013. It's in the last 10 years that the field has evolved further to become a little bit more self-critical about what populations, what kinds of experiences have been left out of the field. And there are two forms or modes of this self-critique that I'd like to overview. The first is called crip of color critique. And this was coined by Gina, J-I-N-A, Kim, K-I-M, who uses crip of color critique to talk about the triangulation of race, class, and disability. For her, one of the problems with critical disability studies as a field is it has by and large relied on the definitions of and experiences of white disabled people. And the problem with this kind of centering of whiteness in the field, beyond the fact that it merely ignores disabled people of color, is it also ignores how the language of disability can be used to obfuscate forms of harm or trauma or just embodied difference experienced by communities of color and experienced by poor communities whose disabilities may never be recognized as disabling. And this has everything to do with access to healthcare. It has everything to do with geographic location, and it has everything to do with forms of kind of settler colonialism that deny or rather disavow ways of understanding the body outside of the Western medical industrial complex. And then the last kind of mode of critique or self-critique that I'd like to address is what I call crypt negativity. And this is actually where my work in disability studies comes into view. Crypt negativity is the notion that the language of disability does just as much harm when it's used within a biomedical model, that is within the medical industrial complex, as it does within the field of disability studies. And that the category of disability increasingly is being adopted into a kind of liberal rhetoric of inclusion in order to justify forms of harm against communities that we may not consider disabled, but who nevertheless experience ableism. And this, to give examples, we might consider the kind of trauma incurred in the wake of racialized police violence that is nevertheless never matriculated in the context of disability. We might consider the forms of debilitation incurred through genocidal regimes or through kind of imperial violence from nations like the United States that debilitate populations whose debilitations are never recognized as disabilities. But nevertheless, what we understand as disability in the West can in fact cause harm to other ways of experiencing embodied difference. So what I hope I've been able to do, and I'm happy to answer more questions later on, is give you a sense of the scope of disability studies. It is a broad and rich field and full of internal contradictions that are worthy of not just one person doing critical disability studies in a given department, but are worthy of collective intellectual inquiry that occurs across disciplines, across fields, and across a university such as UBC. So now that I've given you a sense of the breadth of disability studies, I'd like to briefly address where this scholarship can take us. And there are three areas that I think are particularly generative. One is the histories of disability. A critical disability studies field or a disability studies department at an institution allows us the institutional support to think very critically about the history of disability, not just broadly, but also locally. Here at the institution, here in Vancouver, here in British Columbia, these histories are rich, and yet they disappear without concerted efforts to recover them. Second are the cultures of disability. As we've been hearing all day, disabled people are here. We exist. We don't have to be invited in, though we would like more of it. We're already existing in this space. And what disability studies as a field allows us the opportunity to do is, one, celebrate our existence, and two, think critically about how to support disability cultures in the spaces we're already inhabiting. And then third, disability studies gives us a way to think about the politics of disability. And I don't mean politics only in a kind of electoral legislative sense. I mean a liberatory politics. I mean, how might disability and thinking through the experiences of disability and anti-ableism allow us to envision a different world than we already inhabit? Finally, I'd like to briefly address what a center at UBC specifically might offer all of us. I truly believe that by offering institutional support for disability studies, such as through a center, UBC would not only be signaling its commitment to disabled people, the students, the staff, the faculty who are already here, but would also be practicing that commitment by providing us with the resources we need to build meaningful community around disability and anti-ableism. It's absolutely no secret that in the wake of COVID-19, many people are confronting experiences of disability for the first time. And it's no secret that in a world increasingly defined by environmental crisis, political disenfranchisement, and genocidal regimes, disability is on the horizon for humanity in a way that perhaps it's never been before. And so what disability studies offers us are the tools to grapple with that horizon, to approach it, not just as a set of defined answers that we have to fear or resist, but instead as a range of questions that we can ask about who we are and how we can be together. And so with that, I'll stop. Thank you all so much.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And can I move on to the next panelist? Is it okay? Yeah. Okay. For the next panelist is Dr. Michelle Stack. So let me use my computer generated voice.
The panelist for the topic of disability education is Dr. Michelle Stack. Dr. Michelle Stack is the Academic Director of the UBC Learning Exchange, an inaugural knowledge exchange and mobilization scholar, and an associate professor in the Department of Educational Studies. She is author of Global University Rankings and the Politics of Knowledge and COOPs in Campuses, Responding to the COVID-19 Pandemic. University rankings are cooperatives as a strategy for developing an equitable and resilient post-secondary education sector. Today, Dr. Stack will speak about her work on disability in education.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Michelle Stack, and I'm wearing a green shirt and blue jacket, have gray hair, and a somewhat lopsided smile. With that, I'd like to start by acknowledging that I'm coming to you from the unceded ancestral territories of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish people. And I want to talk a bit about what that means. So Shoto, thank you for your introduction. I'm now the academic director at the Learning Exchange in the Downtown East Side. And over the last couple of weeks, the city of Vancouver has taken down the only shelters that people have in the Downtown East Side. 46% of those people are Indigenous and many are disabled. And they've been left with nothing, even their belongings thrown in the trash. So the people and what does this have to do with what we're doing today? The people in the Downtown East Side are often deemed to be a burden, to be discarded, moved along, and at best given charity and expected to be grateful for rat-infested SROs. Many are just left to set up somewhere else, knowing the risk of further violence for just living. So how is this connected to academic ableism? My answer is because a life worth living is constantly conflated from early schooling on to what Martha Feynman calls the myth of autonomy. Children are taught independence is king, and wealth is conflated with leading a good and worthwhile life, rather than interdependence and cooperation. And I just realized that I forgot to put my presentation up. So let me just do that because that's rather important. Sorry. Just take a second here. Okay, so I'm just going to, as the Logan did it, which that gave me lots to think about in the previous presentation. And so I'm going to talk a bit about how I sort of connect dots that might seem a bit disparate. Because I'm going to talk about rankings in the next few minutes, not few weeks, and cooperatives. So connecting some of the dots. This is a picture of myself when I think I was about 18 with my best friend and co-accomplice, Dr. Heidi Jantz. So we met at an alternative adult ed school. At that point, I was deemed to be disabled, learning disabled, ill, truant, difficult. And then suddenly I met Heidi and I became a good Samaritan, which was terrible for my reputation at the time, just because Heidi had visible disabilities, was difficult to understand. We became friends. I learned how to be her personal care attendant so that we could go to school. Really, she got me through high school in many, many ways, but wasn't given that credit in any way because of ableism. And so that where I think about this is how I went from being at the bottom of the class to now being a professor at a top ranked school, and the whole sort of what that means around how people are ranked, how knowledge is ranked, who's deemed to be important and not important, and what that's based on. So it really was these experiences that have led me to be fascinated and frankly disturbed by how and why people are categorized, and not just people, but the institutions they belong to. So in looking at things like Harvard, why do we see Harvard as a top-ranked institution, an institution that's based in slavery, grounded in slavery, created by enslaved people, with a history of eugenics, for example? Why do we see that as a top, or often see that as a top-ranked university, as other universities should aspire to? I'm also interested in co-ops, cooperatives, and the possibility of cooperatives, and thinking about disability and thinking about disability studies here at UBC. So when I talk about rankings, and I see rankings as really central to how we think about disability at UBC, and the antithetical goals of talking about equity versus the way that we're governed. And so on one hand, we have universities increasingly talking about equity, about ableism, about anti-racism, and commitments to mitigating, to dismantling structures of discrimination. But at the same time, we're based on this notion of the rational maximizer who's seen as productive, that to be a productive academic is to have a high H factor and really to be of service to the ranking. So to be a resource for your university so that it can be highly ranked. Interdependence is seen as a weakness, and resources go to those who are seen as most productive, and often to fields that are entrepreneurial, mainly in STEM. And so through this, inequity is normalized through rankings. And rankings, I think, are really important for us to look at, because I'm fully in support of a disability studies center, and I'm so thankful for the work that's been done by Professor Gagnon and others that are here in raising awareness and in really pushing UBC to look at ableism. In doing that, I think we have to look at how do we also challenge the structures that will continue to maintain ableism? How do we challenge structures that see productivity as how many publications in a high impact journal as central, rather than the ability of the university to contribute to expand conversations at a time of climate crisis, at a time of increasing inequity, to expand conversations based on scholarship. And this is central because rankings at this point, instead of looking at those issues, rankings are media driven. They impact who's selected, what students are seen as productive and desirable, tenure and promotion, and assessment of both faculty, students, and staff. So generally I give like an hour-long talk on rankings, and I'm happy to talk about that more, but just to end that in terms of saying that rankings might seem like a conversation not connected to disability, but I think in ableism, but to me it's central in making sure we look at the way the university is governed, what's deemed important, how people are judged as productive and unproductive, and challenging those structures as a way to create and to create a less ableist university. And so here's where I go on to cooperatives. So often when I have given critiques of rankings, that the response I get, including from academic leaders, is, yeah, we agree, rankings are terrible methodologically, there's issues, but we have to use them in order to maintain programs, in order to maintain our funding. My response to that is that what that points to is the need for looking at other ways of governance. And cooperatives are one such way. Cooperatives are actually about 10% of people are employed or get work from cooperatives. Cooperatives are a huge part of the global economy, but aren't as central here as they could be. Indeed, there's actually a cooperative university in Spain that I visited in the summer that has over 5,000 students. And what a cooperative is that people join voluntarily. It's one member, one vote. There's far less of a disparity between the top paid and the bottom paid. Co-ops support other co-ops. They provide education, and there's a focus on concern for the community. And central is money goes back into the cooperative. And so in looking at co-ops, rather than, for example, a lot of money going into increasing our rankings, our money to huge publishing oligarchies, a cooperative model would allow money to go back into supporting the community, supporting ways of becoming a university that is able to dismantle ableism and other forms of structural oppression. So this is a picture of Mondragon, which again is a cooperative. So faculty and students are members of it, and staff. And you know, it is a model to look at as a way to include people and to come up with different ways of measuring productivity, different conversations, expanding conversations about what is education, what is a good education beyond education as a private good, to talking about education as a public good, and to talking about education in terms of what does it mean to be educated in a world in crisis? What does it mean to really think about interdependence and how we learn about interdependence in a capitalist society? How do we think about those things? And can we even have a university that can contribute responsibly to the world we're in without challenging the way that we're economically structured? I also look to work of the Diverse Solidarity Economies Collective that was founded by Dr. Caroline Shanaise Hossein. And I'm a member of this collective, but what's important about this group is this is a group predominantly of Black women, predominantly of diaspora, who have really formed alternative economic models. And a lot of these models are based on exclusion, but they're really robust. So for example, looking at something called ROSCAs, rotating operating savings credit organization units, where people that have often been excluded from banking come together and help to support each other economically. And this is something where I think we could look at in terms of ableism is, how can we come together to cooperatively support each other? How can we be in solidarity with each other? So for example, as a tenured professor, if I get a grant, how can I think about ways to redistribute those funds to students, to sessionals, to lecturers? Because we know that because of ableism, it often is disabled scholars that don't have tenure track positions, not because they're not productive, not because they're not contributing, but because the way the university is structured. And so I think there's things that we can do within, you know, in thinking about disability studies and thinking about how might we share those resources, redistribute those resources, think about democratic forms of governance. Yes, I'd like UBC to become a cooperative, but I don't think that's going to happen. But there are ways that we can form cooperatives within UBC, or our notions of sort of solidarity economies. And to this, I think there's a lot of work that's been done by Black feminist economists, and also in looking at the work of disability activists and scholars. I don't know if my friend Heidi is here or not, Dr. Heidi Jant. So she's a member, for example, of Creekside Support Services in Edmonton, where a group of academics came together, or a group of, oh, yay, Heidi. So a group of people came together to share resources and to find ways to be in charge, to be in control of personal care services. And so I think there's a lot we can learn from these models in thinking about a disability studies center here that looks at how do we provide that kind of economic support for each other, and also going beyond UBC to looking at academics and students at other post-secondary institutions in BC and beyond. So I just wanted to end with a quote I found really powerful, and it's from a book centering the Future's Disabled in Disability Work, and the quote is, oh gosh, oops, sorry, my screen just went away from me, so I'm going to have to just read it to you. Oh, let's see if I can bring it back up. It's a really good quote. For the interpreters. For some reason it's not sharing. Okay, so the quote is by Leah Lakshmi, and I'm terrible at pronouncing, Pipzani Samara Sasini, and she's asked a number of provocative questions. What if in the near future the majority of people will be disabled? And what if that's not a bad thing? Here we are. What if that's not a bad thing? And what if disability justice and disabled wisdom are crucial to creating a future in which it's possible to survive fascism, climate change, and pandemics, and to bring about liberation? Thank you.
This is Corin again. Thank you so much, Dr. Stack. And the last speaker that who I would like to introduce is Georgia Yee. Georgia is a 6th-year undergraduate student studying biology with a minor in health and society. And Georgia is passionate about community organizing around climate justice, mental health, anti-racism, and accessibility, and currently serves as a student governor and senator at large at UBC.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Corin, and it is such an honor to be able to share this space with all of you. I feel like I am learning so much right now. Let me just screen share real quick. If Canva wants to cooperate. Let's see. Give me a second. Oh. Classic technological difficulties.
Georgia, it looks like a couple folks have put in the chat that it only works in presenter view.
Oh, okay, I see this. That's goofy. Let's see here. Can people see the screen at all? I'm not sure.
I currently see the screen where you're moving your mouse around over top of something where it looks like you're trying to click on presentation screen.
Logan
We're
has
seeing
said,
exactly what you're doing.
Logan has said if you click presenter view and then where it says present at the bottom.
Okay. Oh, okay. Let's see here. Let's see. Presenter viewed. Present. Oh, okay. I see. There we go. Okay. Thank you so much.
We can't see it on the screen yet. Okay, good.
Okay, there we go. There you go. Is it for those who can you see now?
It looks great. Yep.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks for your patience too. So today I'll be talking about the concept of the seat at the table, who is and who isn't welcome, including what that means for solidarity and capacity building, as well as our organizing and activism work at UBC. So before I do that, I want to locate myself and take you on a bit of a journey on my disability activism journey as well. I am an Asian femme with black hair and wearing a black turtleneck and wearing mushroom earrings that secretly have butts on them. And I'm also in my room at home, which is on campus. So for my journey, we'll be going from entering university as a queer, disabled femme of color, up until the most recent disability working group for students, as well as some of the learnings I've had along this journey as well. Before I start, I just wanted to say that I am very grateful to live, study, work, and play on the traditional unceded lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations as well. So several months ago, I was invited to an educational session about accessibility in programming for my work as a work-learn student. And one of the prompts was, what is your experience with disability in your life? And that's a big question for me. As people shared, it became increasingly apparent to me that for abled people, disability existed in the abstract. For people who don't identify as disabled necessarily, especially at UBC, we often treated it as an academic debate. But for me, this was not the case. I feel like I have been surrounded by disability, quote unquote, whether my whole life, whether in my family, friends, or myself as a disabled person. So I want to talk about my mom. My mom has been a role model in my life, especially as an activist for racial justice, women's rights, gender-based violence, and anti-poverty. She's not afraid of being assertive, and she is not afraid of being radical, and she is accountable and kind. So my mom, she started to lose her hearing around the time that I was born, which meant that we learned to be flexible in interacting in different ways. I remember having a heated discussion around feminism and capitalism with my mom, but my mom didn't want to put her cochlear implant on, so I ended up rapidly exchanging notes on a scratch pad to express both of our rage at capitalism on that little scratch pad. But as she lost her hearing, she was subjected to ableist abuse as well, even from family members and even fellow anti-oppression activists she had thought she had been in community with. And this is combined with the experience of being an Asian woman in a world that silences Asian women by casting us as a shrinking, delicate lotus flower. But it had never dampened her fire. So when I was freaking out about how to write this speech, I sat down with her and asked her, how do you think being disabled has affected your activism? And in the words of Mama Yi, she said, you work with it to make a difference and your ways of hope, even though non-disabled others may not work with it. You can't wait for these people to catch up. So I feel like her lessons have guided me in my activism journey. For some context, I probably spent way too much time entrenched in UBC governance, going from Residence Hall Association Place Vanier president, AMS VP Academic and University Affairs, to board and senator and more recently supporting the Disabilities United Collective as well. But it's also fueled by love and passion for the people that I've seen slip through the cracks, failed by a cruel and neglectful ableist system in pursuit of an absurd concept of academic excellence, just as Dr. Stack talked about previously. So when I look back, I also wanted to do good by the first year student. That was myself 6 years ago, worrying about having to drop out of university because I felt like my disability held me back. But now I realize it made me a better student and academic in realizing where I had to painfully advocate for myself, critically analyze our world and understand others, and drive my passion for advocacy because of that. So going back to university governance, I began my journey with the Residence Hall Association, and I'd really like to thank Taylin English, I think she is here today, for really crystallizing my interest in disability advocacy and accessibility activism within this university context. Because of her initiative to create an accessibility policy in residence that required accessibility considerations for programming, such as physically accessible venues, captioning, scent-free considerations, and many more. And I consider her initiative a spark that set off my interest in how accessibility might become embedded in the university. So at the start of COVID, I ran for the Student Union AMS VP Academic and University Affairs as kind of a screw it move. It's COVID. What the hell is happening? And that positioned me as the bridge to the university. I secured millions in dollars of funding for addressing the climate emergency, childcare, food security resources, suicide prevention training, and supports for students with disabilities. I was also invited to over 45 different administrative committees on behalf of the student body, but this also meant that I was frequently the only student in the room, and even more frequently, the only disabled person in the room. And I would hear horrific things. I would often hear academic administrators voice that making accommodations compromised academic excellence and academic integrity. They would defend using punitive and surveillance software like Proctorio on students because that would give students with disabilities an unfair advantage. So-called progressive academics would say that making academic accommodations and being flexible for students would put too much labor on instructors, which we do need to support instructors, especially instructors with disabilities that are already severely under-resourced, but it creates a perceived binary tension between inclusivity, flexibility, and accessibility, and the workload of instructors. And this is the byproduct of people living in survival mode in an economic and post-secondary system that treats education like a product to be sold, and the relationship between instructors and students as a transaction. This antagonistic dichotomy of putting flexibility and accessibility versus the workload of instructors at opposing ends has been created to cover up the institutional neglect in resourcing an accessible teaching, working, learning environment for faculty, staff, and students. So faculty work and teaching environments are student learning environments. We need to be building solidarity and capacity with each other, disabled faculty, staff, and students together. And I believe that a Center for Disability Research, Education, and Activism can play a key role in securing that seat at the table, creating our own tables, creating solidarity, building capacity, and organizing. So I feel that a lot of traditional advocacy is built on getting that seat at the table. The term, quote unquote, seat at the table is generally used for being part of the group that is involved in the decision-making process. It represents an opportunity to be heard and make a difference. But who is welcome at the table? What does being at the table mean? And does it mean that there's someone at the decision-making table that looks like you, that thinks like you? Does it mean that there's somebody at the decision-making table who has had your experience? Does it mean you have a paid representative at the table to represent your interest? And in our world of performative EDI initiatives, the seat at the table is often that tokenistic extractive advisory committee. Some of us quite literally struggle to get a seat at the table. The table is not made for us, and some of us can barely get in the door. And the environment of university governance is often hostile for people with disabilities. So as a Board of Governors representatives, I asked for basic accommodations like captioning, though I was too intimidated to disclose that this was for my hearing loss. And the response for the board secretariat was not to implement at this time due to technology limitations, while the Senate implemented it quickly, which if a member of the two highest governing bodies of UBC has trouble getting accommodations, that probably says a lot about how much an average student or staff or faculty member struggles in getting accommodations themselves. So the thing about getting a seat at the table is that it is often reliant on appeals to power. There are some limitations to the appeal to power. Traditional appeals to power risk surface level responses. They can say that they listened while they continue to sit on their hands with the glossy veneer of "we care about EDI initiatives." So if they don't give you a seat at the table, bring in a folding chair. That is a quote by Shirley Chisholm, who is the first Black woman to be elected to the US Congress. So moving on, I wanted to talk about the initiative this past year as well as part of the board, and I echo the calls to actions from the Disability Affinity Group to create a disability task force as well. And so one thing about being at the table is that you're also often being handled, and doubly so if you are a person with a disability. The administration stalled and consistently made like half commitments to work on it. Like, we'll start work on the accessibility task force after the anti-racism and inclusive excellence report launch in the summer, in September, all of that. And furthermore, it was also people who didn't identify as having lived experience as being disabled that were determining who was at the table. So I decided, we need to create our own tables, starting with a disability working group that would create a set of calls to action. I was determined to have that conversation, even if the administration was not ready for that conversation, and that conversation was long overdue. So we met over the summer to create a calls to action document. I think Corin may also put that link in the chat of our calls to action document, as well as a presentation of our experiences, proposing calls to action to the administration on 8 main themes: promoting equity through administrative changes, improving existing disability-related services, increasing representation of openly disabled scholars and staff, supporting disabled students with funding, scholarships, and research grants across campuses, addressing graduate student needs, making the built environment accessible, creating an accessible culture in teaching and learning, and ensuring equitable public health decision-making. And as part of this working group, I have to thank Leah Chapeller, Rabia Dhaliwal, Jessie Song, Catherine Benson, Corin Parsons, Dana Turdy, Ian Kagviat, as well as Dr. Gagnon from the Disability Affinity Group for all their work on this project. I also want to thank Dr. Mark McLean and Tashia Kutaneu, my fellow governors on the UBC board, for their support in this initiative. So we did end up meeting with the then President Ono, AVP Equity and Inclusion Arig Al-Shaiba, BB students Ainsley Carey, and DVC Leslie Cormack to present on our experiences as students with disabilities and present those calls to action. It was a fulfilling moment to feel heard and to have a commitment of continuing to elevate it to the Dean's Council, the board, the Senate, the executives. However, as you may know, President Ono left in October. So after that departure, I heard radio silence about that. So I am very tired of whether we are invited to the table depending on which way the wind blows. It is time we make our own tables. So I hope that the Center for Disability Research, Education, and Activism can be a form of making that table where everybody feels actively included and listened to. So something I also realized pretty early on, and as some people also alluded to earlier in presentations, is that there are many different groups and initiatives working towards disability justice and accessibility, creating belonging, safety, and striving for change within the university. So there were all these pockets of advocacy, often siloed, but now opportunities like the Symposium offer us the chance to bring us together in solidarity. So in convening all of these different groups representing students with disabilities, the Law Disability Alliance, the Disabilities United Collective, the Disabled Graduate Students Association, the UBCO Disabled Students Association, it felt amazing to hear all these different perspectives and approaches that people took. And it especially feels amazing to hear these perspectives today and to not feel alone in our advocacy. In the hostile, ableist environment of academia, it'll be really powerful for the Center for Disability Research, Education, and Activism to stand as a symbol of united and collective solidarity amongst disabled folk. That said, it's also okay to have different advocacy and activism approaches so long as we have a collective vision and don't work to undermine each other as well. So some of us may like meeting with MPs, some of us may like protest marshaling, some of us may like taking meeting minutes, which are critical to document to avoid getting gaslit by administrators later. And we all come from all of these different disciplines and backgrounds. And as part of recognizing this, we need to recognize the importance of intersectionality and how people position themselves in this work. So the UBC Anti-Racism and Inclusive Excellence report also called for the creation of a disability task force as well. We need to recognize how colonialism, classism, racism, homophobia, and transphobia impact ableism, and vice versa. We cannot address one without the other. Also along the lines of the solidarity and joy is that I wanted to share a concept that was recently introduced to me, access intimacy, which is that sense of closeness you get when someone else gets your access needs. And it's coined by Mia Mingus. And in order to have those authentic, open conversations, we need to have our access needs met. I feel that sensation right now in this space, sharing this. And I hope that the center can also be a space where one can feel authentically themselves. Kind of as Dr. Stack talked about, the current Western individualist capitalist society really shames the need for dependence, but to need others, to depend on others is not a bad thing. It is a critical part of building our community and capacity building. So honestly, it's kind of laughable to me that a person who really sucks at managing capacity and constant burnouts due to brain injuries, migraines, and being neurodivergent, is talking about capacity building here. So once people found out that I was a disabled student, there was also the rush to extract labor as the token disabled student. And I'm kind of terrible at saying no. So I'm kind of an expert on burnout. I've seen so many student activists burn out, going 1,000,000 kilometers an hour, burning hot like stars and then burning out. And this quote by A. Milvaganam was impactful for me when reflecting on student organizing. Ableism is evident in the internalized capitalism amongst organizers, what is commonly referred to burnout culture. One of the main tenets of capitalism is maximization of productivity. This mindset permeates organizing spaces and takes the shape of self-imposing stress and exhaustion, feeling guilty for resting and equating productivity with impact. The system of capitalism forces people with disabilities to push the limits of their health in order to survive. This parallels the limits to which organizers and activists push themselves as a means to an end of making change, justified by the urgency of the crisis. There is no denying that there are crises occurring. However, it is possible for there to be a world where crises are not disproportionately faced and combated by a few communities made marginalized by colonial histories, white supremacy, heteropatriarchy, and capitalism. Rather, crises could be addressed by whole equitable communities where resources are shared. So one thing that contributes to burnout is the isolation. Rest often feels like a luxury, but it is a necessity when we are fighting for our survival. But when we form networks of solidarity, we can share that responsibility and resources and provide gentle accountability. That way we can take a break and get the rest that we need without worrying we'll lose momentum on the movement. Another part of this is that as a student, we very rarely see people with disabilities in leadership positions, especially represented within the academy. So it could be valuable to have a formalized mentorship program. Also similar to what Catherine mentioned with the Law Disability Alliance, where students can also be connected with mentors and see themselves represented in academia and activism. That also brings me to my next point, that I also hope that the center can also become a hub for training and learning. I think that there should be training opportunities, professional development opportunities, leadership training, teaching support for teaching with a disability. I feel profoundly blessed to also learn today about everybody's advocacy initiatives as well. I think another interesting initiative that we could talk about is also recognition and knowledge translation. So often students are working, taking courses, volunteering, and all of that on top of managing their spoons for the day just to survive. And it would be amazing to see disability studies and activism integrated into their coursework and academic life so that their work and engagement within the disability community is also recognized. So that could include scholarships for community leadership and activism in disability. And another thing that we could envision is students could do community engaged research activism for academic credit in partnership with an academic advisor and get credit for researching an issue and implementing some of those solutions and activism, similar to the Climate Justice Research Lab. So putting all of these pieces around capacity building and solidarity together, I believe that this could be a valuable action network for mobilizing disability activism. We could distribute information about actions, campaigns, demonstrations, and lobbying efforts around disability activism to apply pressure on those in power and lead the way to university-wide impact. And I think we can build momentum and acquire, what we talked about around institutional buy-in and all of that too. Another piece that I want to talk about is also the sustainability as well. And sustainability, as I talked about, burnout and academic culture, often is rare to find. And so it also seems that people also have short memories. There is a history and culture of activism and organizing at UBC that people quickly forget and start over. So I think that could be, so we need to create resources for continuity and institutional knowledge to keep activism sustained as well. We can also share resources as well, so that we're not duplicating work, but we're also learning from the lessons of those who have come before us. So putting all of these things together, we can create a toolkit to support each other before we burn out and when we do. Knowing that our isolation leads us to burnout, we can counter burnout through connection. In the words of Manal Matani, we can create constellations of care, connecting each other and presenting a unified vision of disability justice. So some takeaways: activism cannot be done alone. And we are not trying to be abled or normal, but rather finding solidarity and joy within disabled spaces. We're making capacity for change and setting the foundation for organizing. And I also envision a center for the disabled members of our community to sustainably work towards a just future. I hope that it can also reframe the way that we view access to power, and in doing so, create a community and our own tables where everybody is welcome. Thank you. Sorry, I know I went over time, but I thank you for giving me time.
Thanks very much, Georgia. And thanks to Michelle and Logan and our showcase speakers earlier, as well as this morning's keynote, Dr. Michelle Owens. This has all been incredibly useful, I think. And my name is Sherilyn Orbaugh. I'm a 65-year-old white woman with what used to be light brown and now is mostly gray hair. I'm wearing a black shirt and I'm sitting in my home office, which is blurred so that you can't see how incredibly messy it is. I'm the head of the Department of Asian Studies, and I feel very lucky for the last few years to have worked with a group of people, some of them in Asian Studies, but also across arts, that started out looking at issues for disabled instructors, including graduate students and contract instructors at UBC, and thinking about how conditions could be improved, but which has now sort of enlarged our ambitions to think about really bringing together people across campus, both campuses if possible, to make something more solid and central. And our idea has been a center, an official center, which involves particular kinds of bureaucratic steps to go through to create it, and has the disadvantages of precisely having a place in the institution. Some of the advantages of a center that I've experienced in the past in different kinds of centers are that they can be completely cross-disciplinary, cross-unit, cross-faculty, and can even involve people at other campuses. So they are very, very wide in that sense. They can combine advocacy / activism / disability justice with academics, and also with community connections, community outreach. So centers are more flexible than departments typically are in that sense. Centers can create a space for a variety of groups, like the ones that Georgia was just listing, all the people we've heard from today, so that they can maintain their autonomy, but also be in one place together to interact with each other when that is a useful thing. Institutional maintenance, a kind of institutional memory can be facilitated by a center. Some of the things that we've been talking about as advisable as something we would want are all possible with a center. If our goal, and I'm sorry to keep talking because I know we need to get to the discussion, but if our goal is to create a minor program for the BA, a major program for the BA, and then eventually possibly graduate degrees, again, a center is a stepping stone that will let us do that. And we need the bureaucratic foundation of a center, and later perhaps an institute, which is the larger idea of a center, to get those degrees through the Senate and through the BC government. But I also take Michelle Stack's point, very much to heart that, the institution is not our friend in many ways in terms of imagining the kind of collective thing that we would like to be. So all of that said, we can stay beyond 2:30, although I believe our ASL interpreters will need to stop at that time. And thank you so much to the two of them. And the questions that we're thinking about discussing at this point are, what would you like to see from a Center for Disability Research, Education, and Activism? What would be the benefits of such a center at UBC? And what is needed to make it happen? We have two kinds of, several ways that you can participate in this discussion, including after this event is done. We're still welcoming comments, ideas, questions that we will share. But Corinne, if you could explain the Padlet.
Absolutely, thank you so much. So this is Corinne, and as part of our multimodal and multitemporal approach, we'd like to offer the option of participating by sharing your thoughts via Padlet. So Shota is going to put the link in the chat, and at the top of the page, you'll see the questions for this discussion, and at the bottom right of the page, there's a little circle with a plus sign on it. If you click that, it will open a post where you can write your comments and ideas. And after you're done with that, you can click publish. So this is a way that we can continue the conversation even after the symposium has concluded.
Or for those who would like, you can raise a hand and speak your questions or comments. I'm seeing comments in the chat that people have to go at 2:30. I actually have something too shortly thereafter. But there's still a couple of minutes if you'd like to say something.
Just to thank the organizers, and also I just want to clarify, I really think it a center is a great idea. Just to sort of look at the governance model. So I didn't want to be sort of seen as critical of creating a center, but I really want to thank the organizers for this event, because it's the first time I've been to an event in my 20 years at UBC like this, where we're really having honest and I think that sort of transformative conversations about how we can be in solidarity with each other, and also to think through an intersectional analysis. So just thank you to the organizers.
Thanks very much. Donna.
Thank you very much. This is Dr. Donna Solomon, and this is not so much a question as it is a sort of response to the tremendous conversation that has happened today and what's been coming up in the chat. And I would like to really encourage everybody who has been inspired today, who has been engaged, to reach out to some of the amazing organizations that have been represented and talked about and have talked to you today, to see how you can take that inspiration and take that energy to actually start creating those tables and start getting institutional support. Because I know a lot of the people who are doing this work are overwhelmed with the amount of work that there is to do. So if you've got a little bit of energy, come and join us, please. Reach out to us with whatever you can bring. And even if it's just an hour or 15 minutes, whatever it is, we'll take it. And any of the organizations today, I'm sure would welcome support and time and energy and even just engagement. So that would be what I would like to ask for. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Well, if there's nothing else, and I know people have to go. Oh, I'm Michelle Owen. Do you have your hand up?
Yeah, I just wanted to say this was, oh, sorry. This was amazing. Thanks so much for inviting me. I learned a lot.
Thank you. It was really, for me, as someone who's been, at this institution for 25 years, when women's studies was just women's studies and now is something else. It was exciting to see your path through women's studies, disability studies, all that sort of thing, and it all coming together. This is a good time.
Yeah.
UBC is far behind, and we don't consider ourselves rich, but I guess we should, and we should not take that as an excuse anymore that there's no money for these things. Ayaka, you want to close us off?
Sure. This is Ayaka. Again, we'd like to thank all the speakers for your wonderful talks and thank audience members for your questions and comments and being here. Before we close the event, I'd like to thank UBC's Equity and Inclusion Office, the Department of Asian Studies, and Center for Workplace Accessibility for the support that made this event possible. I'd like to thank our project consultants, Donna Solomon, David Gramling, Michelle Stuck, and Alexandra Ba. And thank you, Aiden Quach and Tonya Mo, for your technical assistance on Zoom. And finally, thank you, interpreters, Cindy and Dean, and captioners, Katie and Rhonda, for your accessibility services. And I hope everybody will have a great rest of your day. Thank you.